It is no longer an option to say UFOs are not real. You can still have an opinion about what they are, but you no longer have an option. And anyone who feels that UFOs are not real, and I know I'm speaking to the converted largely here this morning, but anyone who feels that way simply is uninformed. However, despite this impressive backdrop of evidence, many vital questions do remain unanswered. And even we, as researchers and people who are interested, have yet to reach agreement on some of the most basic and essential issues. Now, among other things, what I'm suggesting today is that there is another approach to the data that we should be following, and I think far more so than has been done until now, a complementary approach. Now, my work on the particular case that Chris mentioned that dates back to 1940, that has convinced me over the last few years of research that as we collate all this data, these thousands, hundreds of thousands of sightings, we must also be careful not to overlook the potential value that analysis of any one particular case can yield. Now, of course, the value that we can attach to any single case depends on many factors, and not least the credibility of the witness or witnesses. Now, the case I'm going to give you this morning is, in my opinion, a superb example of the insight that this complementary second approach can yield. This detailed and straightforward report, which has been out of the UFO circle until, in fact, unpublished in UFO circles until just 3 months ago, is the most revealing and informative of any claimed alien encounter that I've studied in my time. There's not the slightest hint of any deception, evasion, or fraud in the story. The witness enjoyed the highest imaginable endorsement for his integrity and honesty, which was often given to me by those who knew him best, unsolicited. So the evidence overwhelmingly points to his experiences having actually occurred, and if that is so, then we have at least part of the question about UFOs and their origins decisively answered. And I'll be giving some other reasons later on why I believe we have to accept this as a genuine case. Now, my motives in presenting this case and saying all the good things about it that I will and have are as follows. Firstly, I believe that all the evidence suggests that this is a genuine extraterrestrial encounter. It has no dimensional, metaphysical overtones. I think that with an anniversary theme for this conference, 50 years of ufology, it's an appropriate and timely reminder for all of us to re-evaluate our methodology, the way we're going about it, and look at the system and the process that we're using to sort out the data. Secondly, this particular case has, as I've mentioned, never been published in UFO literature before, and I believe it deserves to be placed on record as perhaps one of the most preeminent cases of its kind. And lastly, the information which we can derive from this case, I believe, tells us a lot about the agenda for this planet of at least one of these alien groups. Now, before we review what happened in this report, which is deceptively simple, we must remember that this is an unusually early case. It took place pre-1947 in a period that has yielded only small numbers of UFO sightings worldwide and almost no cases where the occupants of UFOs were reported. You could count them on the fingers of one, maybe two hands. The witness, Udo Wartena, his experience took place in daytime, and it involved intimate and open alien contact with a reluctant witness who kept his experience to himself, not even telling his wife, for nearly 30 years after the event. So I've assembled the following account, which I'll read to you now, from two handwritten accounts and one typewritten account by the witness, and from verbal recollections through interviews with a handful of close friends and family members whom he eventually confided in. The photo was taken of Udo approximately 4 years before the experience. Mid-morning, early in May 1940, Udo was at his mining claim, which was a short distance from a lake near the small town of Townsend, near Helena in Montana. At the time, he was 37 years old. He was a miner of Dutch origin, and he was working in the area part-time for the Northwest Mining Company. During the previous month, he had found a glacial deposit at the base of a nearby mountain, which showed indications of gold-bearing ore, and he began working the site in his spare time. To do so, he first cleared an old and neglected ditch which ran around the mountainside, using it to divert the water that he would need for his mining from a nearby stream. And on the morning in question, while moving some large boulders, he heard a humming or droning sound, which he first took to be Army aircraft, which flew over the area occasionally from the Great Falls base in the north. At first, Udo took little notice of the sound, but when it continued, he thought that a truck had driven up, and he climbed up onto higher ground. A large disc-shaped object, measuring about 35 feet high and over 100 feet across, so it's a large one, was hovering a short distance away just above the meadow where he had built his dam. Thinking at first it was an airship, he described it as like two soup plates, one inverted over the other, and resembling stainless steel in colour, though not as bright and shiny. Of course, he had not seen stainless steel like anyone else at that point. This is in retrospect. Now, you've got to remember, this is 1940. This is 7 years before any media attention came to the subject. This is before the sound barrier was broken, before any satellites had ever been launched. You need to keep that in perspective as you listen to his response. As Udo stood watching, a circular stairway with a solid bottom forming part of the craft's hull was let down, and a man came down this and started walking towards him. As I was somewhat more than interested, Udo later wrote, I went to meet him. He stopped when we were about 10 or 12 feet apart. He was a nice-looking man, seemingly about my age, in other words, mid-30s perhaps. He wore a light grey pair of coveralls, a tam, which was a common term in that period, meaning just a circular cap, of the same material on his head, and on his feet were slippers or moccasins. The man came and shook his hand and apologised that they had not known anyone was in the area. I found that very refreshing. He explained that it was not their custom to interrupt or allow themselves to be seen. He asked me if it was all right if they took some of the water. As I said, could not see why not, I said, sure. He then gave a signal and a hose or pipe was let down. His English was like mine, but he spoke slowly as if he were a linguist and had to pick his way. The man asked Udo what he was doing, and this was explained. Udo was then asked if he would be interested in coming aboard the ship, and went willingly and without any sense of fear. As he got underneath the hovering craft, Udo described the humming sound as not loud, though it seemed to go through you. But once inside the ship, the noise was hardly noticeable except what came up the stairwell. Then he writes, we entered into a room about 12 by 16 feet with a close-fitting sliding door on the farther end. Indirect lighting near the ceiling and nice upholstered benches around the sides. There was an older man already in the room, plainly dressed, but his hair was snow white. I then noticed that the younger man's hair was also white. Udo described the men as being young and strong-looking and having clear, almost translucent skin. And perhaps this explains the curious fact that he seems to have asked the men their age even before asking their origin. Clearly there was something about their appearance prompting his inquiry. And the men answered that one was about 600 years old as we measured time, and the other was over 900, so about 600 and over 900 years of age. They also informed him that they knew over 500 languages and were learning ours and improving upon them all the time. When he asked why they wanted to take water from the stream and not from the lake, which is nearby, the younger of the two men replied that the water was good and was free from algae, as if they had gotten the same before, and it was convenient. Many years later, Udo indicated to a family member that I interviewed that hydrogen extracted from the water was in fact the fuel source for the craft. Udo then asked what caused the noise of the craft and was not only shown the mechanism that powered the disc, but was given what appears to be a full and open, albeit basic, discussion of the key principles involved in the following words. This is what the man told him. As you noticed, we are floating above the ground, and though the ground slopes, the ship is level. There are in the outside rim of the ship 2 flywheels, one turning one way and the other in the opposite direction. He then went on to explain to Udo that the action of these 2 revolving wheels or rings gave the ship its own gravitational pull, its own gravitational force, or rather overcame the gravitational force of the Earth and other planets, the sun and stars. And though this pull is but light, we use this gravitational pull of the stars and planets to ride on, like you do when you slide on ice. An interesting analogy when you think of it. Elsewhere, Udo described these rings or flywheels as being about 3 feet wide, several inches thick, and they were separated by rods turned by motors and next to battery or transformer-like units all around the inside perimeter of the circular ship. He was told that these 2 rings or wheels developed an electromagnetic force. Now, this was a term he didn't understand at the time, but he inferred from what he learned that the ability to develop a cheaper and more practical energy source was of the utmost importance to mankind. He was also told that the craft was able to focus on a distant star and use the energy to draw itself through space at speeds faster than light, and they used the specific phrase, skipping upon the light waves. This quotation is, I think, a good representative example of some of the current thinking about the possibilities of how faster than light travel might be achieved. This is by a physicist in a book published in 1994. And it's interesting as you run your eyes over it, and I won't take time to dwell on this anymore, but run your eyes over it and see how closely that mirrors the description given by Robert Lazar so many years later about how the speed of light can be exceeded. You can't read that? Okay, so let me just read it out quickly. The creation of a local distortion of space-time is expanded behind the spaceship and contracted ahead of it, yielding a hyper-surfer-like motion faster than the speed of light as seen by observers. So in essence, on the outgoing leg of its journey, the spaceship is pushed away from Earth and pulled towards its distant destination by the engineered local expansion of time-space itself. Now that is very, very close to what Udo was told back in 1940. I then asked them where they got the energy to run such a large ship. They said from the sun and other stars, and they would store this in batteries, though this was for emergency use only. They carried another source, but did not explain this to me. When then asked where they came from, the alien man replied that they lived on a distant planet, gave its name, which unfortunately wasn't recorded, and pointing in its direction. Udo then asked the man what their object was for coming to Earth. Well, he said, as you have noticed, we look pretty much as you do, so we mingle with you people, gather information, leave instructions, or give help where needed. Explaining that they were monitoring the progression and retrogression of our societies, the man claimed that they live among us from time to time, which gives us a clear statement indicating long-term covert alien surveillance prior to 1940. Udo wrote that he did not understand what was meant by them giving help where needed, but he didn't feel it was proper to ask about it further. When Udo asked if they knew of Jesus Christ and about religion, the man responded, "We would like to speak of these things, but are unable. We cannot interfere in any way." During his time on board, he was invited to be examined for impurities in his system. This is their description of it, by an X-ray-like machine, which is Udo's description of the process, and that passed over him as he lay on a table. Little was recorded by him about this examination, however, and he seems to have attached little importance to it. While talking with the 2 men, a light had come on which Udo believed indicated that the water had been taken care of, and he mentioned that he felt it was time for him to leave. The alien's response was to ask if he was interested in going with them, to which he responded, "I said I thought it would be interesting, but felt it would inconvenience too many people. Later I wondered why I said that." Sometime later, he recalled an incident that had taken place about 2 years previously where a young man had vanished in the same area without trace despite days of searching by a sheriff's team. and he wondered if the young man had met the same craft and accepted the invitation. As he started to leave the ship, the men suggested to Udo that he tell no one, as no one would believe me at that time, but in years to come I could tell about this experience. When I walked away from the ship, they raised the stairway, and when I got a couple of 100 feet away from the ship, I turned around. A number of more portholes had opened up, and though I could not see anyone, I felt sure they could see me. Anyway, I waved at them. The ship then rose straight up till it cleared the trees. Then while circling, or wobbling I think he means, slightly, it practically rose straight up and in a very short time was completely out of sight. As I didn't have a watch, I did not know for sure how long I'd been with them, but according to the sun it was around noon or somewhat around 2 hours. He later related how some type of energy had permeated the area and he had lost his strength for several hours, being unable to walk. When his strength finally returned, he went over to where the huge craft had hovered, finding only an area of crushed grass where the stairway had rested. Later, still feeling overwhelmed by the experience, he walked back to his base camp. Now let's just analyse what has been given us here. First of all, something that comes across very strongly is a strong sense of propriety seems to have prevailed throughout this encounter. Now, unlike you or I perhaps, if we found ourselves in that situation, Udo seems to have instinctively sensed the boundaries of appropriate questioning. I would have delayed their departure, but he was very considerate and seems to have felt that some things were not right to talk about. It seems clear from the whole experience that the taking aboard the craft of a considerable quantity of ordinary stream water as a fuel source for perhaps a small, this is my speculation, perhaps a small nuclear reactor of some kind was the sole purpose for the landing of the alien ship. Now I suggest that we accept this as the probable explanation for the many cases when unidentified craft have been seen to extract water from lakes and reservoirs and the like, and that we can safely assume all this water is not required for the washing of alien cutlery or some other mundane reason. Now, in view of the implications of what amounts to a water-fueled spacecraft, can we also see in this a possible reason for the cover-up, perhaps one of many, by government? And when we realise further that some multinational corporations today have annual budgets far in excess of many smaller countries, the economic pressures to restrict such technology for military use must be considerable. The familiarity with water supplies enabling the aliens to differentiate between river and lake water suggests more than just the obvious fact that they had taken water from this location previously. To me, it also implies an intimacy with the area that could only have resulted from long-term activity in that place. In other words, that this was part of a regular pattern of activity. As with so many subsequent reports, what we are left with is the hints that there is a very simple propulsion system which is capable of overcoming gravity laterally rather than directly opposing it as we do with our own rocket propulsion systems. Udo's description of the counter-rotating rings providing one of the propulsion sources is consistent with so many other UFO reports describing revolving craft or parts of a craft that I don't need to comment any further. A device 100 feet in diameter would obviously generate enormous centrifugal forces and could easily generate a substantial electrical output, but our conventional physics don't predict any mechanism that would allow us to overcome gravity. So obviously only the most basic elements of the craft were explained to this non-technical witness, or perhaps he simply failed to understand or record more than this, we don't know. But the discovery that Martin spoke about yesterday, announced by scientists last year, of a rapidly spinning superconductor ring is a hint to me that we are perhaps close to developing a similar system. I don't know if you can see that, but can you see the similarity despite the difference in the scale of size? A rapidly spinning ring is involved. There's no indication of any mothership in the report that Udo has left us, but rather every indication that in this instance at least, the large saucer-shaped craft that he observed was itself capable of interstellar travel. Now, what do we make of this claim that sounds so nonsensical at first, that the aliens were about 600 and over 900 Earth years of age? Now, these figures may seem excessive to us, but in fact are consistent with many subsequent cases. And I find it interesting sometimes to daydream about this and ponder what an individual could do, a single individual could do. A scientist, for example, if he could personally observe and study any aspect of scientific interest over such a long period, over a period of centuries. Think what you could do if you were a geneticist. And also the possibilities of what an individual could achieve in a lifetime of that length. It's worth noting that the 300-year age difference between the two men was apparent to him only in that the second man looked slightly older. The parting advice of the aliens that Udo would be better to not tell others of his experience until some years had passed suggests to me something else. It suggests that their race may have had countless opportunities throughout the galaxy for interactions with other worlds similar to ours, and understood the process of disclosure that would be necessary, that would take place over time to less developed races. But while I've spent a lot of time in recent years since I came across this about what may be meant by their statement that they give help where needed. Now, by their own statements and by their conduct, this race, and I hope all others, operate under a strict non-interference code when interacting with a less developed race. But equally clearly, alien help hasn't prevented wars, disease, famine, the atrocities that ravage our planet still. So I've concluded eventually that the assistance being offered is probably primarily limited to the gradual sharing of technology that will allow the human race to move beyond its traditional preoccupation, which is tribal warfare, towards the stars, and the necessary re-evaluation of our place in the universe that this requires. And to this end, I believe that as a minimum, our space programs and probably some other scientific endeavours have long had and continue to have gentle nudges on a regular basis from those who live and work among us, but whose real origins remain unsuspected. And now look just very briefly at two statements on public record by the two men who were more responsible for the development of the American space program than anyone else. Dr. Wernher von Braun, both German scientists who came out under Operation Paperclip, and Dr. Hermann Oberth. 1959, we find ourselves faced by powers which are far stronger than we had hitherto assumed, and whose base is at present unknown to us. Can he possibly be talking about Russia? More, I cannot say at present. We are now engaged in entering into closer contact with those powers. Now, if anyone can come up with a suggestion as to who else he might be talking about other than some other assistance from above, I'd be interested. Dr. Hermann Oberth, who worked with him, his colleague, was even more open. We cannot take the credit for our record advancement in certain scientific fields alone. We have been helped. When asked by whom, he stated, by the people of other worlds. This is not hearsay. These are on record. And what of the statement that the aliens knew over 500 languages? Now, at first reading, we may assume that they had mastered over 500 of the 900 or more languages of Earth. But the context suggested eventually to me that many, and perhaps the majority of these 500 languages, were those of worlds other than Earth. But certainly no difficulty in communication was evident from this account. They were able to convey technical concepts without problems and without the need of telepathy or any technical device. As I've researched this case for the last nearly 4 years, perhaps the most impressive aspect to me, however, was Udo's emotional response to the alien men whom he met so unexpectedly that spring morning. It's the constant and revealing theme that permeates his accounts. They were men, just like us, he said, and very nice chaps. He felt remarkable love, or comfort was how he expressed it, love or comfort, in their presence, and he didn't want to leave them. Afterwards, he wished that he could see them again, and he made frequent visits back to his mine in the years that followed, more in the hope that the craft would return than for mining gold. However, he would have no further UFO experiences for the remainder of his life, and he died in 1989, aged 86 years. At times, as you read his original accounts, he seems almost to regret not accepting the invitation to accompany the aliens on their journey. And this is interesting in itself because it suggests to me the interesting possibility that a human could travel in such a craft unharmed at faster than light speeds and could presumably live on their planet just as they could live on ours without difficulty. So the whole account, for me, and I hope for you, paints an overwhelmingly positive picture of these aliens, and I qualify that by saying these aliens, as being an advanced, air-breathing, human-like and friendly race from another solar system. They visit only to unobtrusively monitor our Earth civilizations. They live among us from time to time, assisting and helping the progress of the human race, never interfering with the core beliefs that make up our society. And so we're left to wonder how many other such landings have gone unreported, as this one nearly did, and how much other activity by this particular group has simply remained unobserved. Now, in ufology, this case leaves us facing a lingering and an inescapable issue, and it's a very, very difficult issue. What, if anything, can we learn about this experience in relation to the claims of the contactees, many of whom have reported since this similar experiences? Now, I'm quick to state that in my opinion, the majority of contactee claims are the UFO equivalent of the space junk that now orbits our planet. But I'm also equally convinced that not all such cases are the result of overactive imaginations, inflated egos, or fraudulent intent. I'll take his picture off in case anyone gets upset. I've long felt a concern that the knee-jerk reaction against reports of humanoids in association with a UFO, much less claimed contact, that characterised mainstream ufology for decades and still persists in some quarters, means that much potentially valuable data has eluded us. How many other cases comparable to this have been buried intentionally to the sneering epithet of space brothers, or have simply been lost with the passing of time, as this case almost was? More seriously, the rejection of the early contactee claims has led to a situation today in ufology which I call the cover-up within ufology. Many researchers and groups today reject out of hand any report where UFO occupants are described as being like us in appearance, and any suggestion that some aliens may therefore live among us incognito. And sadly, this bias extends to some of the largest, most influential UFO groups who routinely censor and ignore thousands of reports each year because the reported aliens don't fit their narrow preconceptions. I wonder at times what historians of the future are going to make of such an inexplicable cover-up within ufology, which ignores so much evidence so completely. And there's another assumption within mainstream ufology that's continued to hold back our understanding of what's going on, every bit as much as the frauds and the hoaxes. The natural but simplistic assumption of so many ufologists, even today, that we're being visited by just one alien race has also led to the rejection of reports that don't fit the chosen mould. But anyone familiar with the data, the full data, would have to be forced to conclude that we're being visited by a great variety of beings, and not all of them fit the Hollywood-promoted stereotype. Now, if we define a contactee as one claiming a physical encounter and two-way communication with an apparent extraterrestrial, now this is separate from channeling or other paranormal activities. Udo Wartena was certainly one of the very first, perhaps the first, contactee that we know of. There's much in his account that stands unique among early contactees, as well as preempting those who began claiming contact from the 1950s to the present day. In contrast to almost all other pre-Adamski contact claims, for example, Udo's aliens arrived in a physical spacecraft. Now, that might sound a stupid comment to make, but in fact, only a handful of cases prior to 1940 exist where UFO entities were reported worldwide. And almost without exception, all of these took place without any communication taking place. And even more incredible, that it may seem to us now, almost every other reported contact case previous to 1952 relied on astral travel or some other teleportation or psychic device in order to meet with those of other worlds. Furthermore, for more than 2 years after the writer Emanuel Swedenborg's Odyssey Through the Galaxy, which was published back in 1758, every claimed contact with alien life was confined almost totally to origins within our known solar system, in particular Mars, Venus and the Moon. Now, while belief in the existence of intelligent life elsewhere in our solar system persisted until at least the 1960s, Udo's aliens claimed to be from a far distant planet, which was clearly not one of our sister worlds. The claim for an origin in our own solar system and the other elements that are so common as to be almost universal in accounts by later contactees are totally missing in this unplanned accidental meeting with aliens. One general trend of contactees, particularly prior to the 1970s, has been to claim alien communication by telepathic means and to receive metaphysical messages, which have often assumed a religious context and sometimes led to the formation of religions and cults. We see none of this in Udo's account, which to me further strengthens its credibility. The aliens spoke to him in English, claimed proficiency in many other languages. There was no proselyting. No messages were given. Although they were free to disclose their origin, what they did disclose is basically everything, with one exception. Their origin, their personal details, propulsion sources, aspects of their mission on Earth. These aliens maintained a strict policy with regard to religion and cultural matters, as we would expect from an advanced and ethical society. Although Udo was himself devoutly religious, he didn't see his experience at all in religious or spiritual terms, but just as a straightforward physical meeting with men like us from another planet. Now, these exceptions to the general rule of such cases are impressive enough, but there's more. Several significant elements that we today regard as standard in both UFO sightings and in contact cases seem to appear first in Udo Wartena's experience. The shape and dimensions of the craft itself, the extractions of large quantities of ordinary water, the use of that water as a fuel source, the great age of the aliens, the claim for faster than light travel, the medical examination when inside, the apparent use of more than one propulsion system upon takeoff, the electromagnetic effects experienced. These are just some of the things that have since come to be commonly reported. Now, there's always been a very real danger in ufology that we can perpetuate or create for ourselves arbitrary paradigms that reflect individual or collective biases rather than reality, which is what we're seeking to understand. Now, this has happened in the past, and ufology is the poorer for it. Now, I can understand why mainstream ufology was repelled by some of the more fantastic claims of the early contactees in particular. And most of them were dismissed with little or no serious investigation. And yet, this is where it gets complicated, there's another side to the coin. This very element of the absurd is just what we should have expected. According to sociologists who have now studied the possible strategies that a benevolent and ethical alien race would adopt in making gradual contact with a developing race. And so I raise the question for you to answer yourself in your own way. Could it be time to re-evaluate some of those early cases that seemed at the time to belong to the lunatic fringe? The basic theme of my talk this morning, as I said, is that after some 50 years of ufology and research and data collecting, ufology, I believe, now has the right to expect some answers. So in keeping with that thought, I'd now like to discuss an aspect of modern science that relates specifically not only to what Udo reported, but is also of great relevance to UFO research in general. And this is called nanotechnology. Now, simply expressed, nanotechnology is the anticipated ability to manufacture anything through the control of matter at the molecular or the atomic level. Nano, of course, means billionth. Now this will require mastery of the very nature of physical matter, but I think it's important we understand that no new fundamental science is needed. We're talking about an engineering advance. This picture here is showing one of the very early steps where we have transistors on the head of a needle. We're talking about even smaller than that. In nature, molecular machines, nanotechnology if you like, already exists. Now DNA, RNA, the enzymes that make possible the reproduction and repair of cells in our body and that manufacture proteins are examples that we're all aware of without realizing what they were. But now our own science is moving rapidly towards being able to control matter at the most basic level. Chemists are making great progress in designing and synthesizing molecules that bind to other molecules at specific sites, thus allowing the same self-assembly and repairs that occur in nature. The 1987 Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded for just such a breakthrough. In 1988, a group at DuPont designed and fabricated a new protein that's more stable than natural proteins. And we now have tools in science that allow us to see and to move, manipulate individual atoms. When I was at high school, such a thing was completely impossible, beyond anything you could imagine or conceive. But now physicists have electronic devices such as transistors that work at the molecular level. So what do all of these impressive facts have to do with Udo and with UFOs in general? Simply this. I believe that what we term nanotechnology is nothing less than a major aspect of the alien technology that appears in our skies and sometimes on the ground as UFOs. And I say this because there are some striking parallels between what nanotechnology predicts for the future, even at this early stage, and what we see as UFOs. There are some equally fascinating correspondences between this developing science and the statements made to Udo and to some other contactees. Now let me point out some of the things that nanotechnology foresees and put your UFO cap on if it's fallen off in the last minute, and look at this from a UFO point of view. These are not my words. These come from scientists involved in nanotechnology. Number one, material scientists and engineers are already fabricating new materials called nanocomposites, which have electrical and mechanical properties unlike any others known. Nanotechnology will make possible the production of not only perfectly pure materials, but also large crystals of material, which would open up new uses and processes. Now, just a few months ago this year, scientists in France and in the United States announced the development of carbon nanotubes. And they described them as not only the world's strongest material, those are strong words, no pun intended, but as quite probably the strongest material that can be made. I won't go into the technical reasons why, but quite possibly the strongest material that can be made. Roswell buffs will be interested to know that one of the properties of this fibre is, and I'm quoting, it can crumple without breaking, then spring back to its original shape. If anyone's interested in that particularly, I'll show you the original material on this. It was meant to be printed in the proceedings, somehow dropped out. Number two, so we're talking about materials. Number two, the storage of information at a molecular level implies that super advanced technology can be extremely compact and non-localized. In other words, information storage technology may eventually be able to function much as quantum physics tells us that our brains and consciousness do, unlimited by time and distance. Powerful supercomputers smaller than anything now known could be developed, and one of these, containing all of humanity's knowledge, could be mounted within our head, interface directly with our brain, and result, of course, in an almost omniscient being. These are not my words. Number three, almost any material object. Now, when they say any, they mean any. Whether you're talking about a desk, a battleship, a flying saucer, a bridge, a house, a car, any material object could be manufactured without the limitation of conventional tools, meaning that even very large objects could be built as a single, seamless piece rather than being assembled as separate parts. It has become, of course, in case anyone here is new to the subject, almost a standard description to describe a UFO, and particularly the interior of a UFO, as being without seams, rivets or joints. Number 4, molecular machines could be designed to restore habitats to their natural state, remove specific isotopes from nuclear waste, toxic chemicals from waters, can make deserts fertile, or even terraform whole planets to a habitable state. Number 5, molecular machines could be programmed to destroy or repair diseased cells within the body. They could rebuild damaged organs, restore missing limbs, and restore defective organs to perfect functioning. What would this do? Obviously, it would greatly increase our lifespan. We could also give ourselves the ability to absorb almost 100% of whatever we eat, recycling what we normally excrete and generating the nutrients within us that we need. We could breathe underwater. We could breathe in different atmospheres. Number 6, we could bring up other organisms to a level of intelligence through this engineering similar to our own. And we could create new intelligent biological organisms to perform specific tasks for us. Now, my comment, increasingly it seems that some of the beings reported piloting and crashing alien craft, maybe that's why so many crashes, may be exactly this. I'll return to the description. Number 7. Nanomachines could locate, read, and then store the genetic information of every living species in a central repository, which among other things could then be used to improve or recreate all species. These are not my words, I promise. Perhaps to repopulate a damaged habitat that has been restored. And number 8, the speed of molecular machines would allow us to accomplish tasks in seconds that take days or months, and without the dangerous processes, byproducts and pollution we now have in our industry. What this means in real terms is that the resulting economic revolution would mean that we would eliminate very quickly economic, environmental and social problems that plague our planet. This would ensure that much more of our energy, time and resources would be quickly freed up for more productive and creative uses. Exploring, exploiting the cosmos, for example. So can you see just from those descriptions how closely the promise of nanotechnology relates directly to ufology? The statements made to Udo Wartena and to others look much more believable when we see what our own science is predicting for our near future. And they're talking in terms of years, not even decades. The performance characteristics of UFOs seem more understandable when we envisage what new materials might allow. Aspects of the phenomenon that puzzle us, such as seamless craft, the lifespans many times ours, the whole abduction aspect, the Bigfoot and robotic type creatures that are so often reported. They start to make some sense in view of these new developments. So my personal feeling at the end of all of this is that when we describe alien technologies as being millions of years in advance of us, I think we're probably way off the mark. Many may be only decades or maybe a few hundred years ahead of us, perhaps thousands at most. As with most things, however, there's a dark side to all of this. The wonderful promise of nanotechnology could also be abused by amassing massive arsenals of weapons, self-creating weapons. You could come up with a tremendous arsenal in a very short time, which would have much greater potential for destruction than our current nuclear and biological weaponry. And on a more mundane level, the economic advantage that would result from this alone would allow a nation, any nation, or even a small group that develops this ability to dominate all others. Now this is where it gets really interesting. The concept of nanotechnology, of molecular machines, was first discussed as recently as the 1940s by a physicist called Richard Feynman. But to my surprise last year, while researching this, I discovered that the other man credited with advancing these concepts at about the same time, the 1940s, was none other than Dr. Vannevar Bush. The same man that so many documents and sources name as a member, and indeed the senior member, of MJ12. I ask, is that just coincidence that what appears to be the whole basis for alien technology was a subject of great interest to Dr. Bush? If MJ12 had access to at least one crashed UFO by 1947, as the evidence so clearly indicates, our emerging concepts of nanotechnology now may owe much to recovered alien technology. And of course the reverse is true. Perhaps it's possible that Bush may have been chosen for his position on MJ12 not only because of his broad background in various fields, including computers, but because he had already begun developing some molecular concepts that would prove useful for understanding a crashed flying saucer. And that is true whether the crash was accidental, as we commonly assume, or intentional, as some have suggested. But either way, a link between alien technology or nanotechnology, MJ12, and recovered alien craft is indicated. So wherever the truth lies concerning a link between Vannevar Bush's nanotechnology and crashed UFOs, we can be certain of one thing. The military and intelligence communities would have the strongest interest in the applications of nanotechnology, no matter where it comes from. In the past few years, a number of claims have been made that suggest that one product of nanotechnology in particular, and I'm talking about biological computers that are years ahead of anything available commercially, have already been covertly developed and put to work for the intelligence community. There are some references in the proceedings if you want to look into that more. But if there's any truth in these independently made claims, we see yet another link to ufology and, of course, another reason for a cover-up. Finally, let me just direct some thoughts to all of us as UFO researchers. As we wade through government and military disinformation, through dimensional deception that I referred to earlier, and through alien duplicity, we can, if we're not careful, find ourselves comfortably conditioned into believing that the answers to the whole UFO enigma remain out there, forever tentative, beyond our understanding, or that the answers can be comprehended through simple scenarios. Now, I want to just mention one aspect in particular, and that is the current preoccupation by many researchers with what is in reality only a single facet of ufology, abductions. The preoccupation with this, and please don't misunderstand me, I admire enormously the people who have given so much of their lives, people like Bud Hopkins, for example, to help us understand this aspect. But if we focus on that entirely, it distorts the complex and multifaceted picture of extraterrestrial contact. It conditions ourselves, as well as the general public, that aliens are by definition small grey beings with large dark eyes. And it further gives the impression that alien contact equates only to abductions, when in fact that is only one aspect. It's become commonplace in recent years for many researchers to regard these events, the abductions, as the understandable and necessary activity perhaps of a dying race, or even as a benevolent effort to genetically link our two races. But there's much about the whole abduction scenario that disturbs me and leaves me strongly suspecting that much of it may be merely a cover for something else. As with UFOs in general, the extraterrestrial hypothesis seems likely to be only one of several stimuli behind abductions. I personally think that it is likely, or possible at least, that dimensional entities are involved in abductions because they are what amounts to an intrusive and deceptive charade. Bud Hopkins spoke about it just yesterday. I also think that perhaps the abducting greys are not necessarily what we assume them to be. Their seeming lack of individuality and the hive mind mentality that's so often reported indicates to me that perhaps at least some so-called greys may not be aliens at all, but rather biological robots, doing what is repetitive, dangerous and menial for the more human-appearing figures that are often reported lurking in the background. So for me personally, the jury's still well and truly out as far as abductions are involved, but I'm left uncomfortable because of the violation of basic individual rights that are so evident in so many abductions. The rapes, the coercion, the false predictions, the false promises, the deception, and the trauma that results all seems to me totally inconsistent when we're talking about an allegedly advanced race. But I acknowledge that may too be only part of the picture. Likewise, the cries of conspiracy and cover-up, while not denying that there are cover-ups, there are cover-ups, and I've given some good reasons, I believe, why. But if we focus too much on that, they distract and finally can drown more enduring truths. I've tried today to give some reasons why I believe we can know some of the truth. We don't have to wait for the government to give it to us. But there's a real danger on becoming so focused on exposing these cover-ups that we can become oblivious to what is knowable through careful, systematic and probing research. I don't believe anyone yet has the full picture of what's really going on in the world of alien contact, but I believe that Udo Wartena's experience can tell us that we can know some important pieces of the puzzle. His 1940 encounter gives us the agenda of at least one extraterrestrial group that has long interacted with us, and that in itself should be a key that enables us to understand other aspects of the gradually unfolding program of alien disclosure. Let me just conclude on a personal note. Just last November I was able to fulfill one of my childhood dreams by visiting Cape Canaveral for the first time and seeing the place where so many events of historical importance in our space programs have taken place. It was there that it occurred to me that a part of my fascination with UFOs is that some UFOs represent the space programs of other worlds. In that sense, we can see something of our own future endeavours as we make the planned transition from a terrestrial to a solar species and eventually to a galactic race. Let us never forget that the future of the human family lies in space, among the stars, and necessarily also among those who have also matured beyond their own birth planets. In last year's symposium, I listened with great interest to a summary of some of the more subtle and far-reaching effects to the human psyche that can result from encounters with UFOs and their occupants. And some of these we actually see, and they are apparent in Udo's life following his encounter. Let me just summarise them. There's a tendency, and we're generalising here, we're talking about the big picture. I think that means I've only got 15 minutes left. There is a tendency for many experiences to become vegetarian. I'm not a vegetarian. And with apologies to any smokers, many of them feel the need to stop smoking and drinking alcohol. They become more environmentally conscious, more globally aware. They often have a desire to live rurally. They have a sense of personal mission in life, and almost always a heightened belief in a higher power and an increase in psychic abilities, so-called. Some of these, as I say, are apparent in Udo's life. But I think it's significant that these tendencies, and to me they're all positive things, they have been induced in ordinary people by contact with the larger reality of the universe. Now, whether these effects are attributable to the actual alien contact itself, or whether they just reflect the reawakening of the 20th century mind from a fast food diet of convenience, triviality and our parochialism, I suggest that they point to what lies ahead of us as contact progresses. I think we're looking at some of the things that are coming. Almost all of us hold a well-earned PhD in reality avoidance. In our culture and in our society, from our birth we've been conditioned to avoid some of the most obvious things in life. Most of us have trouble facing inevitables such as death. Some of us tax. For most people, a clear starry night is at best a thing of beauty to admire, rather than also being a reminder of our origins and our future. As ufologists, among other things, we need to stop avoiding the inevitable religious and philosophical implications of extraterrestrial contact and start dealing with it with the profound connection between it all. I applaud the efforts of people like Joe Lewis who are trying to do that. The earth-bound parochialism that dominates and diminishes us in our culture and our belief systems and our thinking is increasingly becoming confronted by reality. This is our future. This is what it's really all about. This is where we're headed. And so it is ufology, perhaps more so than any of the other sciences, that forces us to face the three great realities of existence. Where did we come from? What is this life really all about? And what next? This sudden and dramatic expansion of our collective awareness is not something that is going to happen in the near future. It is happening now. The process of changing ourselves into galactic citizens through the varied aspects of alien contact is well underway, but I also believe that our birth into a new age of opportunity and peace will be a painful and difficult one. The revelations likely to come in just the next few years have the potential to rock our society to the core. So as this process of disclosure accelerates and this deepening interaction continues to intertwine the human destiny, our destiny, with that of other races, we must be prepared for whatever is coming. With the dawning of a new century, in such a short time now, and the third millennium, perhaps the time has come for all of us to make a course correction in the direction we are taking and to achieve a new openness to accept what might lie ahead in the coming years. And I'm not talking just about ufology, I'm talking about it all. I suspect that we have some surprises in store for all of us as the great cosmic drama between light and darkness is played out, and that as we face and hopefully embrace our real origins and our ultimate destiny. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.